All right, and we are live again with another episode of Beyond the Escape. I'm Mike Blogic,
I'm Dane Collins.
and today we have Andy Firkus from Firkenstein Films.
Yes, nailed it.
Uh, so we have Andy here because he's a big horror guy, big movie guy, and we're here to talk about monsters today and how to make them more interesting. So thanks for joining us, Andy. Pulling up my notes here. Anything I missed in the introduction that you want people to know?
No, I think you got it.
All right. All right. So we'll start out, and I'll say that what we want to talk about, we're going to talk about monsters from movies. We can talk about monsters from books, monsters from anything really. But what we're looking to do is, as Danny and I are writing the fiction part of this book, is we want to look for ways of making the monsters less about like hack and slash. Like, so it's not just a video game. How do we let a game master take a creature? Let's just jump right into it, like a vampire.
Right.
You're given stats for a vampire in a game. This is how you defeat them. But what makes them good in the movies where, they're more than just something that's hack and slash, like go stab them with the stake and move on to the next thing. Like, we know the weakness here. Let's move on. So vampires, what's everyone's favorite vampire movie?
I think my favorite is the Werner Herzog Nosferatu, the German version from 1978. It's like a remake of the classical old black and white Nosferatu. But it's really good. I like it. I like that old school vampire, and he's not sexy at all. Like,
Vampires don't generally scare me as an adult, but the one that scared me as a kid, and I haven't seen the movie since, so I have this feeling I'd be embarrassed if I went back and watched it, but it did deeply disturb me when I was a kid, was Salem's Lot.
Oh yeah.
So am I right? Am I crazy about that one? That guy was creepy.
No, and actually that's the same kind of, it's the same like Nosferatu, like long-fingered white, right. Like, yeah, that's the same kind of vampire. I think that's the scariest vampire, because after that it became very sexualized, and right. Like all of a sudden, like, they're not deformed hunchback creatures in the night that are permanently disfigured.
It went bit by bit until they were fully Anne Riced, and
yeah,
they've never really gone back.
I think that's honestly, like, that you brought her up. I think that's a huge reason that change. Like, I think there was an exchange back and forth with that type of vampire up until, honestly, yeah, with Interview and all that Anne Rice stuff. It was just like, after that, sexy vampire is the only kind of vampire that we put in anything.
I guess I'm part of the problem, because when I asked that, I actually hadn't planned for that question. And the first thing that came to mind was Lost Boys. And I mean, and that one's a lot of fun, but it was definitely, sort of sexy vampires. But I think that sort of added sort of some flavor to when I was younger, to go, oh, these guys don't have to be one-dimensional. Like, they don't have to be the evil guy in the castle that's going to eat you. Like,
yeah, do
you want to be a part of them? And like, in the end, you'd hope that most people would side with the Frog Brothers and be like, no, let's take these guys out. Sadly, I think most entertainment went, oh no, we want to make them even sexier. Let's get rid of the foreheads and just do everything, keep the leather and the tight pants.
I like that one in particular, though. I like that you mentioned that, because that's like a ruse, because we do see them with like there's that scene where they attack all the bikers, and you get to see them like when they're actually like vampires, and that shit scared me as a kid. I was like, because you see them as these nice, like, oh, they're like teenage boys, but they're not. Like, how old are they? Like, really, you see that, and it's like, that's almost scarier. That it's like,
when the monster comes out, it's really a monster, I think, as opposed to the troubled. Like, that's the typical thing now, is they're just deeply disturbed. They hate that they have to live this way. They try to feed on animals, but maybe it doesn't work, but they're just tortured. And And where you know, I think that was one of the last ones. It was even kind of a teen movie, a romance. It was all of these things together that we hate now, or at least I do. I don't hate it, but generally I hate most of those movies. And
yeah,
and that was kind of the direction. But when they became monsters, they were scary. They were monsters.
yeah.
If I'm remembering right, it's another one I haven't seen in so many years.
So what do you think the base fear of vampires comes from? Like, Danny, you have your rating system there that we really need to get up so that way people that are watching can like read your rating system and start categorizing stuff with us.
Yeah, and I'll make a note, but I'll try to do that this week also.
Okay.
Let's see.
It's a rating system of monsters and
it's not ratings. It's more of just categorizing. So when we go through all these monsters, I came up with and separately from this, we can't do it now, but when I get this online, maybe you'd want to take a look and see if you have any thoughts on it. But the idea is to figure out what are the different things that scare us. What are the aspects of these different creatures that make us afraid? And I realize there are very different types of fear. And and so breaking those out helps us filter, you know, all of our creatures through these different options. It might help us come up with ideas. That's what you're referring to, right, Mike? Just to make sure I'm not.
Yeah, so it's like the fear of loss of control.
Right.
So
there are examples of movies and stories that fit into all of these that help illustrate it. And I have it all listed out, but it's just not online.
Oh, okay.
And there'll be a little bit of overlap with some of what we're talking about tonight, but I think tonight's going to give it some different context.
So, Andy, one of the things that I've added into the vampire-like creatures in our world is they don't drink the blood. So when you're making a world like this that has magic and things like that, you have to make some leaps that we don't have. So you can make an argument in the world whether it's someone's spirit or soul or whatever. We don't ever provide like a definite answer, but there is a life force that creatures have. Mm-hmm. And a lot of creatures can feed off of that life force. And so the Upir actually feed off the life force of the creature. Like their jaw like unhinges sort of like a snake and they draw the energy out. But the side that I enjoyed the most when coming up with the idea of these guys is that the more they drain from a host, the more memories they get from the host. And then basically the longer they live, the more they have to feed, or the more they have fed, and the more people that are basically living in their heads. So like the older a vampire gets, like the more batshit crazy he gets. He's got all these other arguments in his head. And from a fiction point of view, I have a story written where the character is going to become an Upir, and it's going to be like a detective story that he's learning through his victims of like who killed his clan. But at the same time, like all these overlapping voices of the people who did him and his family harm, he's going to have to live with them forever.
Okay, that's cool. I like that. That's a good concept. I mean, have you ever seen, there is a movie called Life Force where they're basically referred to as space vampires. And that's what they do. They like, it's the same. They don't do the jaw thing, but it is like they actually are sucking the life force from you. It's the same thing, you know. I don't think they add in that element though, but I like that because I think in there they're really old. I mean, they look super young, but they're super old beings. And I think that would affect you. I like the idea of adding the psychological factors in. I think that's a huge like deal. I really like that.
But Danny and I like to make everything more of a pain in the ass. So even living forever as a vampire is going to be a pain in the ass.
There's nothing that's truly just like beneficial. Yeah, there's like always a downside.
Right.
No, I do think, you know, in general, that one thing I like is the idea that you have these monsters putting people through hell, but at the same time, they're going through hell, you know, and it doesn't make them relatable. It makes them that much scarier because, you know, because they're, not tortured in that way. We were just talking about tortured vampires, you know, having to live with it. But you know, beyond that, they're really suffering.
Yeah.
Constantly. Of course, flip side of that one is something like Pinhead, where they're masochists, you know, and that's part of their thing.
Yeah, no, that's actually really interesting because have you seen the series?
The series,
the whole Hellraiser series.
Mm-mm.
Well, there's like at one point they do address, and it's like he was a human, so he's actually interesting because it is like a vampire. Like he was a normal human and got turned into that, and that's something that like I kind of forgot, or you don't really think about with the first, like I think it's the first two. Well, you don't really know.
If you mean the movies, I have seen the first however many movies. I'm a fan.
There's a lot of them. There's
like you're talking about a show or maybe the comic series or something like that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So just the movies is like I think it's in the third one, but they reference like where he comes from, and it's the same thing as like he was a human before, you know, and makes a transition just like a vampire. But you're right, it is much more masochistic for sure.
I've seen an article pop up a lot about Hellraiser, and that people are upset to find out the origin of him as just a human.
Yeah.
Which is weird because I dug that. Like that scene in the movie, it like added depth. Before that, like, I mean, don't get me wrong, the Cenobites are super fun as bad guys and monsters.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
In fact, I just for the sanity rules, I added in a Hellraiser spell, which are hook chains, so the caster can have chains come out and hook into the flesh, but it costs sanity to cast that spell. So I don't know. I like the idea, you know, like, I mean, I guess, you know, really for me, looking at our list here, man as monster has always scared me more than like monsters, you know?
Yeah. I think for sure that definitely freaks people out because like a supernatural thing is one thing, but when it's like it could be your neighbor that's like up to something that you don't know about, you know, that is scarier, I think, because then people like really, because that's what, you know, you take it home from watching a movie or playing a game, you relate it to like your real life, and yeah, you think about that, like you're like, oh well, there is that one guy down the street that's kind of like you know, he's kind of creepy, and you think like he's probably like got people in his basement, you know, and it is that psychological thing.
Yeah, it's like when I watched The Burbs and I got a little freaked out, and I decided I would just always be the creepy family in the neighborhood, and then like I didn't have to worry about it.
That's a good choice. Yeah. I love that movie. It's one of my favorites.
So Andy, what is something in monster movies that drives you crazy?
Something that drives me crazy, honestly, it's kind of like what we're talking about is just like the complete lack of any psychological elements for me to identify either as a viewer or in the characters. Like I really hate you know, everybody uses Hostel as an example because I think that was one of the first, but where it just became kind of violent for violence sake. Like you don't really understand like why, like, you know, why are these people being violent or murdering people, or you know what?
I swear, I guarantee, because Takashi Miike, the director, was in the movie. He was the Japanese guy that comes out of the place before the guys go in, and he was the director was trying to make a Takashi Miike movie, and I don't think it worked. I think he misunderstood because the Miike movies are super disturbing.
Yeah,
and I don't know if you ever saw the oh crap, what's the name of it?
Audition.
Yeah. And that's it is so difficult to sit there. I wasn't expecting it. I saw it when I was younger. I didn't know that's what was coming. Nobody had told me. I just rented it and was watching it and was, oh my God.
No, but you're right. And that violence is like it's something that is like a payoff later. It's like there's not super extreme violence like in the beginning. Like we set stuff up. You're right. And there's like a story.
Yeah, where Hostel just took that concept alone without all of the without all the context and the story and the thing that makes you care and all of that, you know, and just, you know, I felt like just the torture for torture's sake and the disturbing for disturbing sake.
And for me, it's not just that too. Like, I mean, it's anything like a creature that's just like on a rampage killing people, and you don't even really. It's like, okay, you know, sometimes you just like there's that where it's just like the loss of any sort of like the psychology that you can identify with. I think that makes it really hard as a viewer to like care. So for me, that's like the biggest offense. Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, we talked about this on the first one, but I'm interested in your take because the short version is I did a panel several years ago where I was talking about it's basically saying what you're saying, and I want something that makes, you know, where I can relate and understand the story and all of that, and essentially, and somebody made a good point that sometimes the scariest thing is what you can't reason with. So, you know, something like Michael Myers.
Yes.
It's just evil for evil's sake, but it's great, right? I mean, it's The Exorcist. You can't reason with that evil.
Yeah.
But The Exorcist is terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
there are exceptions. There's some intangible thing in my mind that I can't really explain what it is that makes it okay here but not here. But
well, no, that's a good example too. And I think there's different creatures that's like applicable to, because like with a vampire, in most types of vampires, you could like talk to them, and they're like making choices of who they kill and like when stuff like that. And there is like, you know, and then there's these other type of creatures or even characters like Michael Myers is a great one. It's like you can't talk to him, you know, or even like
the vampire counterpart, the zombie.
Yeah, exactly. You can't. There's nothing you can do. And I think that's those are, like you were saying, different types of fears and different types of creatures and why we are afraid of them. So I think that's a great point. I like that.
Well, you know, come to think of it, the zombie is representative. It's like the anthropomorphication, I say that right, of a fear that we all have. Imagine like you know, one of those viral infections that disfigures you and then eventually kills you, and it's coming forward no matter what. You can't stop it.
Well, I like that example because like zombies are specifically that you mentioned that because that's like what zombies are now, but that's like kind of like the third thing that they've been, because it started out as like a thing that came from voodoo, and that even was still like even through the 80s and stuff, that was still a thing that got brought up a lot, like Serpent and the Rainbow and stuff. Like those kind of zombies are voodoo zombies. But then there was like that whole 80s, like Day of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead, like that whole thing where it's about society and disconnection from it. And it wasn't really about like viruses and stuff.
Culture, sort of. It was a metaphor.
Yeah. And I don't know, I for some reason I feel like 28 Days Later was like one of those first ones where it was like it is viral and it is a different thing. And from there on it became about that.
Right.
And you're right, like widespread.
But even if it's even before it got explicit, it was still I would say metaphorical for those types of fears that we just can't. They're coming at us. They're impersonal. You know, natural disasters, things like we can't reason with those things, and we do live with that fear, I think. So somehow, if you're not going to make a monster relatable in some way, then I think you have to trigger that fear that we actually have of those things. That, and again, I don't know what that intangible difference is, because a lot of times you're right. It's like the monster's just there to be a monster, and why do I care about this monster? But yet, in another example, the very fact that it's so impersonal is what makes it scary.
Yeah.
So what is that?
I don't know. They both work. It just depends. For sure.
And it's hard to do that. Like, I mean, in a game, you know, video game, especially a tabletop game where you don't even have the visuals often, like all monsters are sort of that thing that you can't reason with. And you know,
I get
violence for violence sake, or violence is the norm. It's like, it's funny because in tabletop, that's the norm, at least for like D20 style games, is to rectify every situation with violence. And so like, it's no big deal to have that horde of zombies coming at you. We actually had a heated debate at my game this week about the new sanity rules, because it said that when you see a horde of zombies coming at you, you have to do a sanity check. And someone said, well, no, like, you know, like I could just put up with that. Like I'm used to seeing bad things happen. So like I would, it would be just normal for me. And so it is hard because like these guys, one, you know, Danny and I always talk this, there is a huge component of escapism in playing a game.
Yeah.
And you don't want to tell someone like, yeah, you know, you pee your pants when you see the zombies. But at the same time, like
you gotta one time say, hey, roll to see if you pee your pants.
No, that's a good one, because that's like the fear of humiliation. So that's even worse. Like, I think some people would rather be, you know, bitten by something than pee their pants in front of the people they're running away with. You know?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I couldn't resist that one.
No. And so like I think that also our view of things has changed so much in watching movies, playing video games. You know, when I think back to when I played second edition D&D, there's a painting in one of the books that was a cleric holding up his holy symbol, and there's all these skeletons coming at him. And man, that just like that scared the hell out of me. But that was before we had 3D video games, you know. At this point, anyone that comes to a gaming table has experienced hordes of things running at them, and you know it's not scary. And maybe that's why like I lean so much on the you know humanoids as monsters, seeing that we have more than just, you know, humans. We have elves and so on, but like the people using these monsters for them. But you know, you still have to have a nice wide assortment of monsters, you know.
Yeah.
So I guess, you know, it's hard enough to figure out how it works in a film, but to make it work in a game, you know, is especially hard, you know?
Yeah, I get that. You can't just be like, oh, and yeah, you can't just, it's like so gruesome and that's it. You can't just like, yeah, necessarily do that. I get that. That is a challenge, but you know, I think that's a good one.
Well, what they've been dealing with it for years is just giving things more abilities. There's a creature, that's trademarked by Wizards of the Coast called the Beholder. It's a giant floating eyeball with a bunch of eye stalks, and like each eye stalk has a different power. Like one of them's Death Ray, and it's like,
wow,
it scares players, but it's just because it's this insane creature. Like, you know, they keep trying to make D&D movies. How can you make a D&D movie where there's a giant floating eye, and that's not scary enough, but one of its eye stalks shoots out a Death Ray? Like, I mean, it's funny because it will scare players on the tabletop, but like really it's comical. Like,
yeah,
you know, there's nothing
that's like a drastic character, you know.
Dane, did you say Big Trouble in Little China?
Yes.
Yeah, I still want to do a conversion of Big Trouble in Little China to like an adventure in our world, because I think that'd be so much fun.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question, like, what about instead of, because it seems like, you know, from what you're saying, like what I'm saying is exaggerated. I mean, like that's a really complicated monster, like a floating eyeball with like all these separate things that can, you know. What about having things that are like, are there more simplified things where it's like, you know, maybe where you don't know where it's like something that seems innocent, like, I don't know, like a little kid or something, but you don't really know. That's what I was thinking about, like aliens, like with a lot of horror movies with aliens, the thing that's the scariest is like with like, let's say The Thing, right? John Carpenter's The Thing. We all love that.
That's well, we got the question portion in The Thing. That The Thing is my my favorite monster. So go ahead.
I mean, I get it, because think about it. You don't, like, when it first shows up, they don't know what it can do. They don't know, and that to me is scarier than like, okay, you see this thing and you're like, okay, this thing, this eyeball, it shoots this with one, it does this with another. You kind of already know exactly what it can do and what you have to do to like physically stop it from hurting you, right? But with something that's like an alien, you're like, I'm not exactly sure, like, does fire kill it? Does, like, if we do this, does it make it stronger? Or does it become two things now? Or like, so I like those kind of things where it's like, maybe it's not a straightforward villain. Are there things like that where it's like you don't immediately know what it is until you attack it?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a wide range of creatures out there. I was just talking about, like, in general, how they've dealt with things in the past. in tabletop games. And Danny and I are trying to move out from that. Like we've got one creature that is actually in Danny's novella, and whenever players encounter this in any playtest I've ever done, which is a demon, and it's based on an old Slavic myth, where a demon comes from the alternate universe and inhabits the body of a deceased baby, and yeah, and it has like a scream attack, and like every time I play down the table, like the players are like, oh wait, you now have like little demonic undead babies coming at us.
See, that's great.
And so, you know, like relying more on the visual, and I think it comes up to a lot to the storyteller, which actually when Danny and I first started working on Sagaborn, we had talked about wanting to rename the game masters storytellers to set a tone, because like, you can describe any monster and make it creepy to the players. But you have to think of yourself as that, rather than I'm putting these pawns out on the table and you're going to fight them. And I think it's a lot easier too. Like I use a lot of visual aids when we're playing, and I think it's actually easier when you play in theater of the mind to do that, where you can describe something, the players see it, rather than the minute you pull up a map on a table, people look down, they're like, oh, this is what we're fighting, rather than like trying to imagine it, you know. I guess I'm still trying to find the perfect way to deliver a gaming experience, you know. Like I love technology, I love the maps and the miniatures and stuff like that, but at the same time, like nothing's scarier than what you're imagining in your head, you know.
No, I think that's true, and I've seen a lot like of those miniatures and the stuff you make. You're right though, but it's like once you like solidify it as like this is what it is, like you don't think of it as anything else. Yeah, that's true.
All right, so what else? So Danny, your favorite is The Thing?
Yeah. I had a few for different reasons, but that's really the one. And you didn't explain. We're talking about favorite monsters. And,
yeah.
So and the Thing. You know, I had a couple others just because I don't know if they're my favorites, but I think they're worth mentioning because It from It Follows is kind of that impersonal thing we were just talking about. But I felt like that was the ultimate. It just keeps coming towards you, and you know, the whole movie, it's just relentless. And I don't want to spoil it in case people haven't watched it, but that movie was intense to me.
I agree. That's a good one, because you're right. You don't even really find out where it comes from or anything. That is a very like, that's a great one. I forgot about that.
Yeah. And the demon from the Wizard of Earthsea, I think it's not scary, but it's a really effective monster. That because of, well, I can't say too much about it because that would be entirely spoiler for people who haven't read the book. But you know, it's a meaningful monster, you know, and I like that about it. It wasn't scary, but very meaningful.
Yeah, and I mean, like in a game, you know, you have to have. I mean, I guess you don't have to have fighting in a game, but it takes so much more to prep for just a total social interaction type game. And being honest, I do love games where you do have to fight monsters with different abilities. But one monster that I've always really liked was Pumpkinhead.
I don't know if you noticed, I put Pumpkinhead on our thing under the Supernatural.
Yeah, I didn't write it down because I thought it would just naturally come up.
Yeah, but I you're right.
And obviously, like, I'm attracted to it because, like, the visuals are, like, so good on him. Like, it's like the new phenomenon.
I just watched it on Halloween.
Well, I guess we can't say new because it's a little bit older now, but, like, Slender Man and everyone loving that. It's that same feel, you know, look, kids would come into my art booth and be like, oh, man, you know, you're drawing a Slender Man's awesome. Like, you know, he's this long-time creature, and, like, they'd tell me this myth. Well, that's totally invented on the internet. But to them, it was real. But I think it was real because it taps into that thing that we've just had forever. Like, you know, when I was a kid, that was the scariest part of falling asleep, was like sometimes right before I fell asleep, I don't know if you guys ever experienced this, I would be thinking about stuff, like people doing things, and then everything in the world would warp a little bit. And like, I don't think that happens since I've been an adult, probably because like I've got too many like business things on mine, where like when I was a kid, I was just like exploring the world right before I went to sleep. And the scariest thing is if the world warped and people like stretched out really strangely, and then I fell asleep. And I like, there's something so creepy about that. And Pumpkinhead, when I first saw that movie, I was like, there it is. That's that thing that scared me when I was a kid.
You know what's interesting is I don't know if you saw, another thing I added to our agenda was I think it's a separate question to ask about creatures that really deeply disturbed you as a child or as an adult, but you know, particularly as kids. I think we have these things. It's like they haunt us for a while even after we watched it, you know. And the main, then after I thought it was an interesting question, but then I'm like, well, what's my answer? And Texas Chainsaw did to some degree, but the one that really did was my own dream, and it had a name, The Man with the Purple Twisted Neck, and it was me and my dad. I was maybe 5 years old, I think. My dad took me to a I remember it was in a strip mall, and we went in, and it was like one of those things where you're gonna sit and watch somebody do a sales demonstration, rows of fold-up chairs and just an empty office space or whatever. And we all took our seats, and my dad paid admission, and we took our seats, and guy comes out and announces The Man with the Purple Twisted Neck, and he comes out, and he's this tall, gaunt, like you were just saying, stretched out, pale man with no expression. He was completely expressionless, and he had the skin on the front of his neck was twisted until it was like this big bulging bulbous knot of that it was purple. And but other than that, he was just pale and thin and tall. And I don't remember what he started doing, but at a certain point he looked at me, and he started walking over toward me, but his expression never changed, and he just walked toward me with a purpose. And I got so scared. That was the first time I ever had that, like, I couldn't breathe in the dream, but I couldn't breathe. And then I think he asked my dad if he could take me or something. And my dad's like, yeah, sure. And then I woke up like, holy, because I think I remember the feeling. No, he reached down and he touched me. And when he touched me, it was like dying. I don't know. It was a crazy experience. And then I woke up.
That sounds really creepy.
Yeah.
But yes, my story was longer than I meant it to be, but it was yeah, he had that stretched out, thin, gaunt thing.
I got worried for a second because I thought you were telling the story of what inspired the nightmares, and I was like, where did your father take you? Like, what sort of weird strip mall, like, freak show? Like,
no, yeah, the whole thing was a dream.
All right. Still creepy, but not as creepy.
Oh, man.
I had nightmares when I was a kid, there's a window, I think, near my bed. And in my dreams, this like weird big alien creature would come and talk to me through the window, and nobody else could see him. So in my dream, if my mom came in the room, I'd be like, Mom, help me. And she's like, there's nothing going on. And she would leave, and he would just be there taunting me. He's like, no one else can see me. Like, I am just here for you. And that the windows, man, people looking in through the windows, giant fingers, like hiding underneath the bed, and like creatures reaching in through the windows and stuff. Like, that always freaked me out.
These are things we can use.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe not directly, but like, I don't know if we're gonna do fingers. Or men with purple twisted necks, but I think there's something to this, these things that really genuinely creep us out. Do you have anything like that, Andy?
Yeah, well, when you first mentioned like movies, I was thinking, like, I remember one that was like that affected me later, which I didn't know I don't think it was supposed to. It was the Dark Crystal. there's that scene where they strip the one guy of all of his clothes, and they all kind of like are on him at once, and they're really just the noises they make, and they're really like dark and foreign, and like that freaked me out a lot. And then they throw him out, and he's like super skinny, and it's like, oh, I didn't realize that's like what was underneath those creatures, and that freaked me out. I'd have nightmares about that because I would watch it when I was like 4, and then I'd dream about them attacking me and like ripping me apart and stuff. So yeah, that stuck with me. Like, you know, it was one of those things that freak you out. But I think all that comes from survival stuff. But it is weird that it's, you know, like what images or what things stick with you, you know, that freak you out.
I think that the Dark Crystal, the design work in the Dark Crystal has affected my art more than any other movie.
Man, it's beautiful.
I mean, when I was a kid, it scared me, but I would just put it in the VHS. VCR. Wow. I can't believe I forgot what that thing was called. I just put it in over and over and over again, and I get freaked out, and I just watch it over and over again. And that's something neat, too, about that film that I don't know how you could work this into, like, tabletop gaming. But one of the things that freaked me out about that movie so much was that it really existed. Like, everything in there was a real prop. And even because when I told myself, like, don't get scared, but that thing is actually real. It's still moving around. You know, you get that disconnect now with digital stuff where you can be like, that's not real. And you're like, yeah, it's not real.
Yeah, I actually agree. I was going to bring that up in general, just because I know, you know, we're relating it to a lot of things with monsters, but just in movies, I was going to say how they've changed. Like for me is that digital aspect of it, whether it's a shark in water, or like, you know, you look at like, oh, Alien, like at first in that first movie, Alien, that's all puppetry and animatronics and stuff. And when you watch the later ones, and you can really still see like how digital, it's just like, it takes me out. Zombies for sure are a huge one, you know. So even just visually, that I think for me takes me out of it a lot.
That's the case with a few, like action too. Like, you know, that was really, when I saw the new Mad Max, it was such a contrast from what I had been seeing. You felt that action.
Yeah.
So I just think in general, it's like my mother was asking, do you ever think now that they're making these CGI human beings, you know, to replace people who have passed away and stuff like that, you know, are they ever just going to stop hiring actors and actresses? But I think just psychologically, just knowing that it's not really happening in any way, you know, it's not even a person, something's lost maybe.
I mean, maybe on us, but maybe not on other generations. They may not care.
But yeah, I think mostly with horror though.
Yeah, I agree. That definitely takes me out of it. You know, and just other elements too that are very like one thing I was going to talk about is related to monsters, which is kind of what I was bringing up with Aliens, is expectation versus like reality, in the sense of what you expect a creature to do, or like, because it's all like, that's what it all is. Like when you see anything, whether you see zombies or you see, I think Mike, you were describing to me like this wizard that's like sucking life out of somebody and things like that. When you see something, it's also like immediately what could happen next, and what could this creature do, or what could my interaction, like what could happen. And I think that's something that you guys could play with too, is like expectation versus what does happen. Like in movies, like for me, that's always definitely when, you know, one of the things that hits best is when you think like, oh, this is what this creature can do, or this is what's going to come of it. And when it's something different, that's even scarier, you know. It's that unknown. We
are including some optional things with I think what you're saying probably goes beyond this, but at least it's one step, so people don't quite know what to expect. The game master picks a creature and then picks certain traits, characteristics. Am I saying this right, Mike? They can have different powers, because within some species you're going to have different skills, different, you know, there's diversity within.
That makes sense.
So that way people at least don't know exactly what to expect every time they encounter this creature.
Well, it's I think that just knocked something loose in my mind that's even more important, in that not what you expect from the monsters, but in tabletop gaming, you're expecting to kill everything every time. Like when you go in the room, you're like, I'm going to defeat this and move on, because this creature is just going to defeat me if I don't. And so I wrote down, like, not seeking the death of the players. Like, what if, last time we talked a lot about sanity and people losing control of their characters through the loss of sanity. But what if a lot of the monsters aren't seeking the death? Like, what if the Upir is not actually seeking killing the players, but adding more people to his, like, harem of things that he sucks life force from? And that players, they're not going to die from the Upir. They're just going to be imprisoned and lose years in game until they're freed,
Yeah, actually, that was something I was going to bring up is too, like, I wrote down these two other things about fear, and a couple of them, and one of them was related to that, where it's like loss of being an autonomous person who can, like, move around and do what you want. And that's, I think, part of it is like it's an imprisonment would be cool, or a possession for a certain amount of time, like even after you interact with this thing, like if it still lasts with you for maybe the whole game, but a certain amount of moves or plays, things like that. But the other thing is, I thought of, like, what if it, instead of wanting death, it wants, like, all your fingers or something like that will affect you for the rest of the game. Like, that's all it wants. It doesn't like the rest of your body. It just wants to eat your fingers. And, like, stuff like that can control. If you can't now hold a sword, you have to learn different weapons. I think stuff like that could also affect that kind of stuff a lot, and be kind of, like you're saying, they don't seek death. It's like something different.
Right. Yeah. That adds a lot more to what we would have to create with each monster. Like, what are their goals? What are their wants? But
for work, I'm just throwing shit out there,
No, but I mean, like, I think it's really good for, I mean, there's a lot of creatures that we have that are coming over that are sort of like, they're not evil. They may be angry at, like, because they're coming from a universe that's being destroyed into this universe. But they could all want different things out of being in, like, the Euteria universe. They could be like, I want, I just want to live. Or, like, they might want to come over and rule people. And so it wouldn't even be not seeking the death or the enslavement, but more like just mentally tricking them into following them, You could really make, because when you look at D&D, like, all the demons and devils are big, scary things that want to kill you. And there's not really a lot of stuff in life that's like that, like, not even if you're out in the woods, the grizzly doesn't actually, its sole being is not there to kill you. A grizzly bear might hurt you a lot, but it's not like, it wasn't on this earth created just to kill you, which a lot of things in games are,
Yeah. No, that's true.
I like the fingers thing, though. I'm writing that down.
Or your toes, man. Then you got to walk slower. Anything. Also, you guys mentioned it, and you were talking about your favorite creatures. And I just want to say, even though they're not scary to me, and they never were, I think my favorite creature of all, like, type of creature, is the gremlins from Joe Dante's Gremlins. Even, I think, like, it freaked certain people out, I'm sure. Like, I believe my little sister was scared of them. Like, clearly not Gizmo, but as soon as the gremlin showed up, it was like, what are these?
I loved the gremlins.
Just beautiful design, but particularly in the second one, I love when there's, like, have you seen that Key and Peele sketch where it's like the vegetable gremlin and the lightning gremlin, and, like, I just thought that they went totally crazy with it. But anyway, that's probably my favorite. Like,
but I mean, when I say I love them, I mean I love them loved them like I wanted to hang out with those guys.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's true. But it's like they're still scary. Technically, I mean, they were trying to.
It was kind of a horror movie, but
yeah, I mean, they were killing people in like a lot of people, and especially in the first one.
The first one bugged me a lot, and I didn't realize it until I rewatched it as an adult. In that, if there's a rule to something that makes sense, like if someone says, "Mike, don't open this door, otherwise the water's going to flood in," I am a person that like I can accept that rule. Like there are rules that are made to be broken, but when there's rules that make sense, or if you're like, huh, like that seems a little bit odd, but it's a little weird of a rule, I'm gonna follow it. I'm a rule follower when it comes to those rules.
Yeah.
That movie just, as a kid, I didn't know it, but it was driving the inner Mike crazy. Because I'm like, what are you doing? It's so easy to follow these rules.
They're super easy, yeah.
And going back and watching it.
But in hindsight, if somebody told you don't feed him after midnight, you'd be like, this is bullshit. Right?
Also, though, let's be fair. All those things, they don't do on purpose. Like when they trick him and they turn all the clocks back, and he didn't think he was breaking the rule.
Oh, sure.
So I'm just saying.
Yeah, but I take things so seriously that, like, I mean, it would just freak me out. You know, like if I'm over on Dickerson Road, some guy comes up and hands me a little furry creature in a box and gives me these rules, I'm just going to follow them. Like, I'm going to have 3 clocks.
No curiosity to, like, find out what happens. I don't know.
I mean, the first rule, whenever you have some rules to follow, is you don't immediately invite Corey Feldman over to your house. Like, that's just...
Oh, yeah, he is. I forgot that yeah. That's hilarious. But I was also going to say, for creature design, I also really liked, I guess they're alien, like, wolf bears from Attack the Block. Have you ever seen Attack the Block?
No, we started watching it last week, and then we actually didn't finish it.
Well, I just like the creatures. Both the queen as, like, this weird alien, little tiny, like, alien. She's interesting. And but then the big, like, all the males are these, like, just jet black with neon green teeth, and like the way they run and scream. And so I really like them as character design, even though they are all digital. I think that was a smart way to pull it off, is not have to have all the details. It was more about just this like force, this like horde. I thought they were cool.
So, you know what a good example of that just reminded me of how a good gaming session can happen without getting into all the stuff behind the monsters is the original Cloverfield movie.
Yeah.
When I walked out of that movie, I was like, I don't know anything about the sea creature. I don't know anything about the creatures popping off of it. But it felt like that there was a rule set that they were following.
Mm-hmm.
And that you were basically in the place of the player where you don't know what the game master's throwing at you. You're just trying to roll with the punches. And in the end, I was so impressed when I read all the planning that they had done with the creature. Like, for a creature that you see for 5 seconds, the planning, what the little things were, all that, it added so much to that movie that it wasn't just, these creatures weren't doing things to make the story go forward. The story was changing to deal with the creatures. And I think that if you make interesting creatures, that a story, whether it's in a movie or like on a gaming table, the players can feel it, because like it's not changing. It's not like silly. It's like, oh, here's this rule set, or here's this creature has these abilities, and I have to figure out why and how to get around them.
You just made me think of it, and I've thought about this before, but it never came up in conversation, is the format of, when you do a normal dungeon, and you're going from room to room, right? And exploring, and each round, maybe you go to the next room, whatever. And then you walk into a room, and there's a group of, some kind of ooze monster just hanging out that then attacks you. Every time now I know there are exceptions, but generally what happens is they're waiting in that room. It doesn't feel like the dungeon is alive with activity. And I think adding even a hint of that as you walk into the room, this creature's coming from the other direction, just to make it feel a little more alive. I think, I think that probably is helpful too. And I don't know how we bake that into the rules or monster manual. Maybe as a tip. Do you agree that that's a problem in general with modules?
Not anymore.
No.
I feel that second edition, you had a lot of stuff just thrown together for fun, like, basically like mindless killing or whatever. But I think now people think a lot more about the ecology of the dungeon. Like, why is this creature here? And I know that I do, you know, like every dungeon that anyone goes into that has some sort of intelligent creature always has like, you know, a trash room that's like filled up with like scraps and poo and gross stuff, you know, and then that always leads to a place, because there's always, if you have a room that's like that, like one of the play tests I did, there's a trap where you could accidentally trap yourself in the trash room, and there is like this like trash eating monster in there. And so it made sense why it was just hanging out in that room, because it just hangs out in this room and the boggarts would come throw their trash in there and he would just slowly eat it. Right. But then when the players got trapped in there, all of a sudden he's like, oh, hey, like a warm meal. And so from the outside, yeah, it's just like, okay, I got stuck in a stinky room and fought this thing, but there was a reason why this creature was attracted to this place, you know?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to think of a way to get a little more unpredictability into it, where kind of what he was saying, it doesn't just apply to the monster itself having some surprises. Maybe you don't always know what to expect, but maybe you don't know how, 'cause there's still sort of a sense of, generally, I think, that it's like you're progressing until you reach the boss. You know, the boss encounter is at the end of the dungeon, and that's when everybody can split their treasure and go home. But what if the boss was roaming the dungeon, and you know that the boss is roaming, you know, and you don't know when you're going to accidentally run into the boss? I guess that's kind of what I'm saying, is figuring out ways to add a little bit of unpredictability to it, because they're moving around also. They have lives to live and things to do.
Yeah.
Or they might be looking for you.
Yeah.
You know they're coming after you. So it kind of reverses it. Maybe we have to get out of here before they find us, or, you know, things like that. That adds, I'm just saying, I think those sorts of things could add a little more of that tension and fear.
Right. Well, I think that goes into what I was trying to touch on, which is reasons for things to happen. One of the biggest drawbacks I see to a lot of players now, not a lot, I don't play with a lot of people that tabletop a whole lot. Most of the people I play are playing pickup games, or they played video games, and they don't think that these creatures have a mind, you know. And often players can get a little upset because they're like, oh, these creatures are out thinking us. Well, you're in their home, you're in their lair. Right. Like in the last Drinking Dungeon episode, the players had a great plan. They wanted to like make them come up the ladder and attack them. But these goblins knew that there was another entrance to come around behind the guys. So if they're in this room, they knew that they could come around behind. And so the players can be like, well, that's sort of cheating, you know, like how did they come through with that? Well, it's because these are thinking creatures as well. Like they're not just going to be coming straight at you like zombies getting blasted. Like that's no fun. Like if movies work like that, it wouldn't be fun. It's, you know, you run through one door, but the creature's already thought that you're going that way, so he's already outside waiting for you.
But I do like, one of the things about that too is like, I think that's good to add elements of that, but not make it like where it's completely unpredictable. Like completely. That's one thing that like the series, the like Nightmare on Elm Street, like I love the first movie. Like it does feel like there are like a set of rules, and like the characters learn what the rules are. How do you do? And then as you get like further along in the whole series, they lost that. And all of a sudden he becomes this like, sometimes he interacts outside of dreams, and like there's all this, and you're like, wait, these rules don't make, you know what I mean? So I think, yeah, if you give them like certain things like that of unpredictability that people have to figure out or like learn, I think that's great. Like enough, but not too much. Like I think
you could come up with interesting scenarios to continue to play off what I was saying, where, you know, you could, you know, you're looking for each other, or one, you know, he's looking for you. You could also have situations where you can build up tension by maybe there's kind of a stalemate between the antagonist and your party, and there's some item in this dungeon that neither one of you knows where it is, but the first one to get to it, you know, will be the one that can defeat the other. And now it's you know, you're racing against the clock. That sort of thing. So you can come up with all kinds of scenarios that add a little bit of excitement, fear, things like that. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's funny because Aiden today was talking to me. He's the one that's helping convert some creatures over in the book. But he's going to write an adventure that's an offshoot of our current adventure path that we have out, where it's an old castle and the players want it for themselves, but it turns out that the goblins from the first adventure also want that castle, and so both the players and the goblins enter the castle from two different ways, with the thought of trying to clean out the castle and make it theirs. So you're going to be cleaning out this castle of all these creatures that have like come to call it home, and you're going to race these goblins to like fortify it and make it so that way the goblins can't take it from you.
Oh, and that's exactly, that's perfect.
And I think, you know, one of the best bits of advice I ever got for designing adventures was like, what is the hook for each scenario that makes it interesting? You know, they're not just on flat ground fighting each other. Like, who has the high ground? Is the ground slippery? Is like, who has the upper hand? And what can make this scene interesting? And really thinking of it as like a thematic movie scene, which I think we're trying to take out of just the adventure thought into making the monsters thematic as well. I think that adds so much. It's just like, you know, here's these things that these monsters can bring. Here's these things that happen in the scene. And now the players figure out how to deal with it, you know? And to your rule thing, Andy, that is actually one of the things I've been setting up this week, which is rules for the different types of monsters. So like a construct, which is like Frankenstein, you know, like they have low light vision, and they have dark vision out to 60 feet. Mind affecting spells can't mess them. Poison, sleep, paralysis, stunning, none of that affects them. Not subject to critical hits. And so if
they should also be like music there is endearing to them.
Oh, that could be pretty good.
If you play a little flute or something, they may like be calm and pacified.
Well, one of the things that Danny and I did is we were adding in a weakness for certain creatures. So like on the flesh golem, we could have like music being something that like slows it down.
Yeah. Also, are there non-organic monsters like robots, or like, because you just said things that are made, and I was just thinking, are they always like creatures, or are there things like
made with magic, animated by magic, but inorganic?
Yeah.
Well, no, the constructs are organic, but there is some sort of a elemental type thing, right?
No, it would still be. So a good example was in one of the play tests I had. It was a dwarven facility for like taking care of a dam, and so they had a dwarven drone inside that was just there to keep everything in working order.
Oh,
so
okay.
He was like a machine, but he was powered by magic.
Yeah.
And he was a real fun fight because he had all these things that were there to keep the facility working well. So he had like a grease gun, he had a little flamethrower for getting rid of vegetation, and some like claws. But like when you start fighting him, you know, all of a sudden he's spraying the floor with grease and like shooting a flamethrower at you. So like he was a really fun fight.
Yeah, see, that's cool. I was just curious. I didn't know if there was, because I thought about robots, because that was one of like, I was just making a huge list of like any type of monsters, you know, and I thought about them because I kind of thought of them as like a loss of control, kind of like, I think Danny, you mentioned it at one point, like a werewolf and stuff like that. And I was thinking like, that's a huge psychological thing, just loss of control of either as a monster or, you know, or as a player. I think that's a huge thing that we're all scared of. Like the same thing with like possession or like anything else where it's like, you're still there, but you're either doing things you don't remember or that you can't physically control. And that's, I think, super scary. I think, you know, or what's that thing when people wake up and you can't move, but you're aware and you can see, like
sleep paralysis.
Yeah. Stuff like that kind of, like, even just thinking about that freaks me out, you know? So I like that for sure.
I think another thing that comes into play in games a lot, and sadly it's been a long time, you know, like back when Danny and I used to play when 3rd edition first came out, like in the early 2000s, from that time until like now, I never had a group that really delved into the world. And so if you don't care about the world and the people in it, all of a sudden you're losing a lot of the fear. And so like the session we played this week, my players are really starting to get into the world, and I've spent a lot of time building up a city that they know and NPCs that they run into. And so like there's this thing going on where people are setting buildings on fire for this festival that's like Halloween. The city has a thing called Maruk's Night, which is like the god of death, and it's sort of based on Devil's Night. Is it Devil's Night up in Detroit? That's what it is, right?
Yeah, I know you're.
Yeah. And so, but this certain group of people started burning all the homes of people who weren't human, and so the players, which I love philosophical debates. They were like, well, we were hired to guard this warehouse, not to go out and save people. And then someone's like, that's happening over in Dwarftown, and Dwygar lives over there. Like, we have to go check on him. And so then, like, the horror that they experienced coming around the corner and seeing these guys that have, like, beaten up this old dwarf, like, it added something that you don't get in a video game. You can if the video game's well written, but, like, you use that in movies a lot, where it's like you get mad because someone's doing something to someone that you cared about in the beginning of the film.
Yeah.
And so when you get that good play group that has that, using NPCs where they really fall in love with these NPCs and then things happen to them, it can really like make a monster like really a monster if it goes after those people.
Yeah, I like that. That's a cool aspect to add to it for sure. I like it.
So, well, we're at about an hour. Is there any final things that you guys want to talk about?
Let me do a quick lightning round.
All right.
All right. So first, this was a note from a while back, but I got to get it in. Beastmaster, the creatures that when people they're trying to sneak through, and the leathery bat creatures with no faces. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
That haunted me as a kid.
Those are creepy.
Although that movie is awful now, but but those creatures were creepy. Anyway, so I was thinking earlier about we were talking about the difficulty of translating some of these themes, these things that make a movie or book scary, into gaming. And I thought of just a quick obvious example, and I realized I don't know if this sort of thing, if you've done this sort of thing, but the idea of that creature that keeps coming. So the Michael Myers, the Jason, or the It from It Follows. You could do that where you have a creature that has you can't kill it. The players can't kill it, and it just relentlessly, maybe it's stuck on one player, and it just relentlessly follows, and the whole game is for them to stay a step ahead of it while they're figuring out how to whatever. I don't know how you defeat it if it can't be killed, but that sort of a thing that could be kind of scary.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, and it just anything, just that idea of you can't kill it and you can't reason with it. You just have to keep running and stay alive while you figure it out. Which led me to thinking about the possibility, and this is out there, so it's probably, but maybe it'll trigger a better idea than what this specifically is. I was thinking there are a lot of, we just sat here and threw around a lot of ideas that I think could make great encounters. But the only way you get an encounter is in a module. You don't do encounters in a creature catalog. So what could you get away with doing, like a single use creature book where you build a creature like this, the creature that just keeps coming, because that's not going to have much of an effect if the players have read about it. It has to be kind of a spontaneous thing that they haven't read. So you'd have to have an agreement that you just trust each other, that the players will never read this particular book of single-use creatures. And it might even be existing creatures, but you come up with what the scenario is. It's this creature, one creature, like one specific individual that has a story. that made them this way, you know? And do you think, is there something you could do along those lines?
I mean, I think for gaming add-ons, I think anything is.
But is that an interesting idea?
Yeah.
Single use encounters. So that way they don't need a whole module. They can, if they want to write their own module, but you give them an encounter and just a list of ideas for them to create these interesting encounters for their characters.
I mean, I think like little, like living environments, like you could do little, you know, like maybe just call it like, you know, bare bone layers or something. It's like, here's the place where it lives. Here's its motivation.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the scenario, you know. Brian Cooksey, the co-writer of Sagaborn, he actually came up with that a while back. He's like, we should put a whole line of like just side quests. There are these like little nuggets of ideas, and you know, that's definitely in the list of things to do. It's just I have to finish the 4 books I have on my plate right now.
Right. Well, you know, and we could get started with the idea, and I guess we sort of talked about this anyway, but maybe it's another way of looking at it is as we're doing these, we talked about telling a quick story about one of our, you know, our encounter with the creature or something we heard about. But we could actually think, when we do those, we can think of that creature as a specific example, you know, and come up with a little backstory for that creature if we have it, you know, just that sort of thing. We can at least think about it as we go. Because that'll give the game master an idea of how you might come up with a scenario, and it plants in their head. Don't just plant this guy in a dungeon and let the characters wander on. You know, this creature has agency. It has a will of its own. It has a reason for what it does, and so forth. And that's gonna give it a strategy against the players.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think any jumping off points you can give to a game master is, you know, myself as a game master, I love it. You know, like the minute, I mean, basically watching any TV show or any movie, all I'm doing is stealing ideas for future adventures, you know?
Right.
I was going to tell you guys, I didn't know how long, like if you have to stop, or we can stop at any point, right? We don't
usually go to an hour, but I don't think we're strict on it. Right, Mike?
Right.
Okay. Well, because there were 2 things that I wanted to bring up as type of things that were like fear-based, because I was just thinking about, you know, like types of monsters and stuff. And one of the things that I was thinking about was like It and Freddy Krueger. And one of the things that they both do is isolate members from a group. And that's like, I think that's a huge fear. And like with It specifically, that's a great example, you know, where it's like, as it tries to attack you, if you're with a group, other people can help you out. And I saw some of that when you had written about like the sanity stuff, that it was like that, where it's like people can help you immediately and stuff. And I think that's great. And I think that that's one of the things I want to say is like abandonment or like removal from the group, or specifically like that monster only targets a person. Like as the group moves on, like for some reason, like, you know, whoever, let's say, killed that monster, something was left with them and they're not like allowed to leave the room for a little bit or something as people move on. Like, I think that's a fear or like a thing you guys could add in. Does that work at all?
Yeah. And I love stuff like that. Sometimes I wish we could actually have like two game masters going on. So like I could pull one group aside and, you know, another guy could deal. So that way people aren't just sitting there playing on their phones. While we concentrate on one person.
Yeah.
And you can sometimes run some of that like off screen, like if something happens, I try to send my players like different messages of what's happening in the off time, and then I leave it up to them to bring it up at the next game session. You know, if I had a group that was really into it, I would be totally down with like running individual scenes just for them, you know. Often during a gaming session, you know, you want to keep everyone interactive, so you'd want to try to do those when everyone's not over at your house playing.
Yeah.
But no, I definitely think it's cool. Like I had one character that I was developing a lot, where a creature from the other side was really focused in on him, and he hadn't really played a lot of role-playing games, and so his character was a lot like him. And so she was using things that his personality traits against him. Like, so he's like falling into this, like, oh man, this beautiful, like, Fae woman is like coming after my character, and like
she was honeypotting him.
Sadly, he had to leave the group, so that didn't get fulfilled, and I'm trying to figure out a new angle for her to come back into the group.
So what about like something too, like where, like, is it a thing where it's like, because this happens in movies a lot too, where it's like you walk into a room, you don't know that there's anything there, and then all of a sudden, like, one player starts like getting affected, or people get affected. You know what I mean? Is that a thing where like people don't realize that something's in the room, but there is? Does that happen?
Yeah. So if someone walked in a room, they do awareness checks, and if they fail that, then like they don't know what's around them.
See, if I played, I would have known that one. I wouldn't even ask. But can I tell you my one other idea that I had that I was thinking about? Yeah. Instead of like actual death, I was thinking about like or actually physically being hurt in any way. Is there ever anything where they like humiliate a person and it changes how the group sees them, or how anything like that, where it's like, you know what I mean? Because that's like I don't know. I was trying to think of fears, and I was thinking like that's a huge fear thing, and that could actually mess with people if all of a sudden like you're going on a group and like after your interaction with them, they're like, man, like you're a lot weaker than we thought you were, Mike. Like, like, or whatever. It's like it could affect things.
I have one concern with that, and that's what Mike said earlier that we've talked about a lot. That people are playing these games for. It's kind of a fantasy fulfillment.
Yeah, you're right.
I think being faced with fears and overcoming them, that's part of the fulfillment,
You're right.
But being shamed.
No, you're totally right. No, but that's why I wanted to ask, because that's just part of it, is like, I thought is, that's one of people's biggest fears, is that like,
it is, yeah.
But you're right. That is like,
but that's the one we want to escape when we play games, probably, for the most part.
No, you're totally right.
But I mean,
it's something to consider, though. Still, if you could, I feel like there's a way you could do it, without it ruining.
It doesn't have to be super negative. Yeah, you're right. I think you could work around that and make it something else. But I was just trying to think about how monsters interact with people, or like, things like that.
Well, no, I mean, and I am totally about adding in things that aren't standard to D20. Playing Dungeons and Dragons is how people get into role playing, and then soon you go, oh man, I'm just a murder hobo going around killing things and stealing its money. And then you want more most of the time. Some people are completely fine with that. Some people can play the first person shooter games, just run around blowing people up nonstop.
Yeah.
But other people at some point say, I want something a little bit more. I want like the next level of just killing and grabbing loot. And so, I am completely fine with watching Sagaborn evolve out of the murder hobo origins that it really has. It's the easiest thing. Throw people in a room, have them do combat, roll some dice, and go. And I never played a lot of those other games. Me and Danny and I we played D&D, and that was about our extent. I mean, we played other ones, but they were also like shoot 'em up games. And then now that I'm older, it's finding that balance between like writing my own game and playing other games. So there's a lot of games out there that are doing a lot of interesting things, and I would love to experiment with all of that. And so like we just added in sanity score to dealing with harsh things in the world. Adding in a reputation score.
Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of my players, just when they put out the fires in Dwarftown, they're actually wanted by the city guard. But when they left, all the dwarves were chanting, hail the heroes of Dwarftown, because they like put out the inferno that was destroying their section of the city.
Yeah.
And so like their reputation would go up, but then it's a double-edged sword, because, oh shit, all these guys are going to be talking about these people that came in and saved their part of the city, but they're wanted by these other guys. So I definitely think that there's something there to play with. we don't want to be classified as writing the bully system either, though.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that.
Ha, Firkus peed his pants.
By the way, I do think I've always thought it was funny, and I'm sure I'm not the first to bring this up, but the classic RPGs, it's funny and disturbing that the classic RPG system, to get good at all of your things, you have to get experience. To get experience, you have to go out and kill stuff. And this is, RPG video games too, but the equivalent of this is like, if I want to get good at guitar, I go out on a murder spree, and then I come back and pick my guitar back up, and I put whatever points I picked up from those murders into guitar. Now suddenly I can.
And now you can rock.
Yeah.
Dude, I just killed Eddie Van Halen.
The logic of these games.
That's who I thought of first, man. Like when you said that, I was going to say Van Halen.
Well, and luckily a lot of games are moving out of that, where, I mean, even Sagaborn is no longer experience for combat. It's encounters, and that's social encounters, anything. So I'm glad that we've moved out of that mindset, at least. Or at least some of it. I still love having my players go out and kill things.
Well, yeah, that's part of the fun, right?
So, all right. Well, I think I've got all my notes wrapped up. I got a nice messy page of notes here.
Yeah, I actually have more than we went over even, but it's all stuff that we don't need to talk. I'll put it in our notes.
Put it in our to-do stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Andy.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
All the way from the upside down, as we can tell, with all the lights around you. Thanks for coming.
Absolutely.
All right, and I will talk to you guys soon. And everyone else, thanks for watching.